If my Lyft driver hadn't slowed to a crawl when we turned onto my street that October night, I would have gotten out of that car, walked up my front path, unlocked my door, and stepped into something I would not have survived. I am Vernon Cole. I am 66 years old and I live in Tucson, Arizona. This is what happened to me. After my wife passed, I started volunteering 3 nights a week at a workforce center downtown, teaching basic car skills to adults trying to get back on their feet. The same Lyft driver kept showing up every night, and after a few weeks I started bringing him coffee. One night he drove past my house instead of pulling into the driveway, and he said quietly, "Something's wrong. Don't get out of this car yet." What he showed me next, what he'd been sitting on for 3 weeks without saying a word, changed everything. I'm glad you're here. Drop your city in the comments below. I love knowing where people are watching from. And before we go any further, some names and identifying details in this story have been changed. The events are real. The lessons are ones I wish I hadn't had to learn. Now let's begin. My wife Dolores died on a Thursday morning in late March. She had been complaining of chest pain since Tuesday. I told her to rest, that she was probably overdoing it in the garden again. She said I worried too much. She was right about that, about most things. On Thursday morning she sat up in bed, said my name, and then she was gone. The paramedics said it was a massive heart attack. Fast, they said. Painless. I don't know if they actually knew that, or if that's just what they say to make the living feel better. We had been married 38 years. We met at a job fair in El Paso in 1986. I was 28, freshly certified to teach vocational education, standing next to a folding table with my resume in one hand and a cup of bad coffee in the other. She walked up and asked if I was always that nervous, or just at job fairs. I said I wasn't nervous. She said my coffee cup was shaking. I married her 4 months later. We raised 2 kids in Tucson, a son who now lives in Denver and a daughter, in a 3-bedroom ranch house on the east side. We drove used cars and took budget road trips and sat on the back porch every summer evening, watching the monsoon build over the Santa Catalinas. When I retired from Rincon High School 3 years ago, after 32 years in the auto shop classroom, Dolores made a cake with a little fondant wrench on top, and we sat at the kitchen table and ate the whole thing between the 2 of us. The house we bought in 1994 for $148,000. According to the county assessor's last notice, it was worth just under $800,000 now. Between the house and my teacher's pension and what I'd put away in my 403(b). Over 32 years, I had accumulated somewhere around $500,000 in assets. I hadn't thought much about any of it. Dolores handled the finances. She was meticulous. She kept everything in color-coded folders in the filing cabinet in the office. After she died, I didn't know where anything was. My daughter came from Scottsdale the morning after the funeral. She sat at my kitchen table and helped me sort through those folders. She asked which accounts were in Dolores's name only. She asked about the beneficiary designations on the pension. She asked whether the house was in both our names or just one. At the time, I thought she was just being practical. She was the organized one. She'd worked in financial services for years. I told myself she was being practical. The nights were the problem. I could manage the days, the hardware store, walks around the neighborhood, eating meals even when I wasn't hungry. But the nights pressed in on me in a way I hadn't been prepared for. The house was too quiet. The bed was too wide. I'd fall asleep watching television and wake up at 2 in the morning with the screen still on, disoriented, reaching for someone who wasn't there. A man from my church told me about a workforce reentry program at a community resource center downtown. They needed people with trade skills to teach adults getting back on their feet after incarceration or long periods of unemployment. Basic car maintenance, how to check your oil, read a warning light, change a tire without calling someone. Nothing complex, but necessary. I started going 3 nights a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, from 6 until 9:30. It gave me somewhere to be. It gave me a reason to put on shoes. I drove myself the first few weeks. One night, heading home on Grant Road, I ran a red light without noticing it. A car swerved and leaned on the horn, and I pulled into a parking lot and sat with my hands on the wheel for 15 minutes. I was physically fine, but I wasn't fine. My son called the next evening. He said carefully, the way he says everything, "Dad, just think about using a rideshare for the late nights, just until you're sleeping better." I downloaded Lyft on a Sunday afternoon. It took me 40 minutes and 2 phone calls to my son before I got the credit card entered correctly. When my first driver arrived that Monday, a college kid in a Honda Civic, I felt ridiculous sitting in the back seat of a stranger's car to go 8 miles. By the third week, the same driver kept appearing. His name was Darnell. He drove a clean, dark green Chevy Malibu. He was in his mid-40s, broad-shouldered, with close-cropped hair going gray at the temples and a steady, unhurried way of moving through traffic. He was always 5 minutes early. Every single time, without fail, he waited at the curb with his headlights on until he saw my porch light come on. Only then would he drive away. I noticed that. I didn't say anything about it at first, but I noticed. The nights were getting cold for Tucson, which means the low 60s, which I know doesn't sound like much, but after 30 years in the desert, your blood thins, and 60 degrees feels different than it used to. One Wednesday, I carried 2 coffees out of the resource center. I'd noticed Darnell kept an energy drink in his cup holder that he never seemed to actually open, more out of habit than need. When he pulled up, I handed him one of the cups through the window before I got in. He looked at it for a moment. "You didn't have to do that." "You're always on time," I said. "That matters." He accepted it slowly, like he was deciding whether it was the right thing to do. Then he took a sip, and I got in on the passenger side. I'd stopped sitting in the back after the second week. It felt too much like being ferried somewhere, and we drove. That was the night we started actually talking. He'd spent 11 years as an adult protective services caseworker for Pima County, specializing in financial exploitation of elderly residents. "You'd be amazed how common it is," he said, "and how the families always have a story. There's always a reason they needed access to the account. There's always a way they frame it so it sounds like love." "What made you leave?" I asked. He was quiet through one full red light. "I built a case against an estate attorney in the foothills. He had a pattern: widowed clients, recent loss, disoriented, trusting, and he'd get them to sign over power of attorney under the cover of estate planning. By the time I had enough documentation to refer the case, my supervisor told me to drop it. The attorney played golf with someone on the county board." "And you didn't drop it?" "I filed a formal complaint with the state licensing board. He merged onto Oracle Road. They eventually investigated. He lost his license." "That sounds like a win." "I'd already been pushed out by then. They made the job unworkable after I filed. I resigned before they could manufacture a reason to fire me." He glanced at me briefly. "My ex-wife said I should have let it go. We didn't survive the argument." "I'm sorry," I said. "My daughter Maya is 16. She lives with me. She wants to go into healthcare. Physician assistant program, she says. Not nursing. Don't call it nursing." A small, real smile. "She's the only reason I bother with most things." He pulled up in front of my house. We sat in the dark for a moment, without talking. "You have a good night, Vernon," he said. "You too, Darnell." After that, I brought him coffee every shift. Some nights I'd carry out a couple of granola bars or a sandwich half I hadn't finished from dinner. He never asked for any of it. He accepted every time like it was unexpected. And every night, without exception, his headlights stayed on at the curb until my porch light came on. My daughter started coming to Tucson more frequently around mid-November. She'd always been busy, her job in Scottsdale, her husband, her own life. But suddenly she was down almost every weekend. She brought groceries. She cleaned my kitchen. She asked questions. "Dad, have you updated the will since Mom died? Are you the only name on the bank accounts now, or is it still both of you? Have you thought about what would happen to the house if something happened to you?" I told her Dolores had managed all of that, and I was still working through the paperwork. She nodded and said she just wanted to make sure I was protected. Her husband stayed in the driveway every visit, engine running, never came inside. I'd wave to him through the window, and he'd look up from his phone and nod. Then, in early December, my daughter said something that should have made me stop. We were having dinner. She'd brought a pot of green chile stew, Dolores's recipe, which she'd learned from her mother, and it was good but strange, the way familiar things feel strange when the wrong hands make them. "Dad, I'm a little worried about your memory." I looked up. "What do you mean?" "You called me last week to ask about your financial advisor. Then you called again 2 days later with the exact same question. You didn't remember calling the first time." I tried to recall it. I couldn't. I've been under a lot of stress, I said. I know, but it's happened a few times. You forgot we had lunch plans. She folded her hands on the table. I just want you to see someone, a specialist, just to have a baseline. Mom would have wanted you to take care of yourself. She put a business card on the table, a name, a practice, an East Broadway address. I'll make the appointment and I'll drive you, she said. We'll go together. I said yes. She squeezed my hand and looked relieved. I didn't know what I was agreeing to. What I didn't know, what Darnell had been carrying alone for 3 weeks, was already in motion by then. He told me all of this later, after everything was over. I'm telling it to you now because I need you to understand how narrow the margin was, how close I came to not being here to tell it. It started on a Tuesday night in early November. Darnell had accepted a ride request from a bar on North Oracle Road, a sports bar loud with game night crowd noise. A man walked out just before midnight, tall, well-built, wearing a jacket that looked expensive, his tie loosened, his walk just slightly off from the bourbon. He got in the back seat, gave an address in Scottsdale, and was on his phone before Darnell had pulled out of the lot. Yeah, I'm handling it. His voice was flat and certain, the way drunk men sound when they think they sound sober. She's working on the old man. Just need the paperwork signed. House alone is worth close to $1 million. Add in the retirement and pension, we're looking at well over $1 million, maybe $1.5 million clear. We just need to move fast before he starts asking questions. Darnell kept his eyes on I-10, his hands steady on the wheel. Old man's in Tucson, the man continued. Volunteers downtown a few nights a week. She's already got him thinking he's losing his mind. Doctor's already on board. Once we get the trust amended and POA in place, it's done. He ended the call somewhere around the Chandler exit and leaned his head back and closed his eyes. When they reached the Scottsdale condo complex off Hayden Road, he got out without a word. No tip. Door slam. Darnell sat in the parking lot for a long time. Tucson, old man, volunteers downtown, daughter working the plan. He'd spent 11 years reading case files that started exactly this way. 5 nights later, the same man requested a Lyft from the same bar on Oracle Road, same name in the app. Darnell accepted the ride before he'd fully decided to. Drove to the bar, picked him up, headed to Scottsdale. The man made one call. The attorney's ready. Doc Foss will have the evaluation paperwork done by end of week. Says the cognitive findings support a petition if we need to go the conservatorship route. A pause, to listen. She doesn't know about the contingency plan. Keep it that way. Old man lives alone. He comes home late from volunteering. He's tired, guards down. If he won't sign the trust amendment, we have ways to make this move faster. Darnell pulled into the Scottsdale condo lot. The man got out. No tip, no eye contact. Door slam. Darnell drove to a parking lot on Camelback Road and sat until after 1 in the morning. He thought about the 11 years, about the case files, about the patterns he'd learned to read, the compliant doctor, the rushed paperwork, the carefully managed isolation, about the case that had cost him his job and his marriage, about the attorney who had lost his license 2 years after Darnell was already gone. He thought about who drove 3 nights a week from the downtown resource center. 1 passenger. Same route, consistent schedule. He opened the Lyft app and looked at his ride history. He thought about the coffee. He thought about the man who'd handed it through the window, like it was the most natural thing in the world, who'd said you're always on time, that matters, and meant it without ceremony. Then he drove to a Best Buy the next morning and spent $140 he didn't really have on a dashcam with audio. He installed it below the rearview mirror. He checked the Lyft terms of service. He activated the voice memo app on his phone and tucked it in the seat pocket behind the passenger headrest. He accepted every ride request from that name over the following 2 weeks. He got 3 more conversations on record. The attorney's name was Whitaker, an estate and elder law specialist with an office in North Scottsdale, who had a history of working in gray areas when the money was right. Dr. Foss was a geriatric psychiatrist who had agreed to conduct what was framed as a routine cognitive evaluation and produce findings that would support, if needed, a conservatorship petition. The trust amendment was already drafted. All it needed was my signature, obtained voluntarily or otherwise. In the last recording, made on a Wednesday night when the man was sober, and therefore more deliberate, Darnell heard this. It has to happen this week. The attorney says the window's open right now. Two guys know the address. They'll be there Thursday night when he gets home from volunteering. If he signs, we're done. If he doesn't, a pause. He's 66, lives alone. Make it look like he had a fall. It happens. Darnell pulled off the road. His hands were shaking when he stopped the recording. That Thursday night, I climbed into his car at 9:40 with a coffee in each hand. I hadn't slept well in days. I sat in the passenger seat staring out the windshield without saying anything for 3 full blocks. He let me have the quiet. I saw a specialist Monday, I said finally. My daughter took me. She'd set it up weeks ago. I stared at the passing storefronts on Grant Road. He did all the tests. I answered every question right, drew the clock correctly, counted backward from 100, made it down past 40 before he stopped me, and at the end he told me I have early cognitive decline. Darnell's hands tightened on the wheel. He said it wasn't about getting the answers right, I continued. It was about patterns, subtle signs he could see that I couldn't. I shook my head. My daughter cried. The doctor talked to her like I wasn't in the room. Said I should consider a supervised living arrangement. The word sat in the car between us. Arrangement. Vernon, Darnell said. He said it the way you say someone's name when you've been holding something and can't hold it anymore. I need to tell you something. All of it. And I need you to hear it through before you decide what to think. He drove into the parking lot of a closed tire shop on Oracle Road and put the car in park. He told me about the man from the bar. He told me about the 2 rides. He told me about the dash cam and the voice memos, and the 3 weeks of recordings he had backed up in 3 separate places because he'd needed them to exist somewhere safe, in case something happened to him first. He told me he knew what he'd risked. He told me he couldn't not do it. Then he opened the app and pressed play. My son-in-law's voice came out of the speaker, easy and certain and absolutely cold. She's working on the old man. Just need the paperwork signed. We're looking at well over $1 million, then the 2nd recording. Doc Foss will have the evaluation done by end of week. Then the 3rd. She doesn't know about the contingency plan. Then the 4th. He's 66. Make it look like he had a fall. It happened. I sat in that car in a dark parking lot in my city and felt 38 years of certainty go out of me like heat through an open window. My daughter, I said. My voice didn't sound like mine. She knew about the doctor. She set up the appointment. Yes, he said. Does she know about the men? Darnell was quiet for a moment. In one recording, he says she doesn't know the contingency. Whether that's the truth, he let it hang. I pressed my hands flat on my knees. I could feel my pulse in my palms. Vernon, he said it carefully, before I drove into your street tonight, I looped around the block twice. There is a car parked at the far end of your street, 2 men in it, engine off, no lights. They weren't there last week or the week before. I couldn't speak. I was not going to pull into your driveway, he said, until you knew. We drove to the Tucson Police Department on South Stone Avenue. Darnell was calm at the front desk, calmer than I was, calmer than I deserved anyone in the building to be on my behalf. He stated our names and that a man's life was in immediate danger and that he had audio evidence. The desk officer made a call. A detective came out of a back hallway, middle-aged, rumpled suit jacket, sharp eyes that had seen a great deal and still paid attention. Detective Hargrove took us to a small interview room and listened without interrupting, while Darnell explained everything from the night of the first accidental pickup through the recording he'd made 48 hours ago. Then he played all 4 recordings straight through. When the last one ended, the detective's jaw was set in a particular way that told me he was working very hard to remain professionally composed. Mr. Cole, he said, do you consent to us investigating your daughter and her husband? It was the hardest single syllable I've ever produced. Yes. At 12:40 in the morning, the radio crackled. 2 men in custody at the north end of my street, a sedan with no front plates. Officers found a folding knife, zip ties, and a notarized document. A trust amendment with my name printed on the signature line and a blank space waiting. My son-in-law was arrested at his Scottsdale condo at 1 a.m. My daughter was taken in at her rental home in North Scottsdale an hour later. Attorney Whitaker was picked up the following morning. Dr. Foss was arrested 2 days after that. His office records showed he had conducted similar fraudulent evaluations at least 3 times before in other states, always moving on before the complaints caught up. I couldn't go back to my house that night. Darnell drove me to his place in Flowing Wells, without asking whether I wanted him to. I wouldn't have known where else to go. His house was small, and the porch light was on. Inside it was lived in and warm in the way that homes feel when someone is actually living in them rather than just sleeping there. Maya came downstairs in an oversized sweatshirt with her hair pulled back, looked at me with the steady, assessing eyes of someone who has spent her life watching adults navigate difficulty, and said simply, "You can have my room." I said I wasn't going to take her room. She said she fell asleep on the couch, doing homework half the time anyway, and went to get me a glass of water. Her room was small and covered in purpose: nursing program brochures, a whiteboard dense with pharmacology notes, an anatomy poster above the desk, a textbook on the nightstand with about a dozen sticky tab markers sticking out the side. On the wall above her desk she'd pinned a printed quote, "Do the most good you can, in the place you are, with the time you have." "You really want to do this?" I said. "Physician assistant," she said from the doorway. "Not nurse. Not that there's anything wrong with nursing. I just get that question a lot." She tilted her head. "Dad says you taught shop class for 30 years. 32. Did you love it?" I thought about it honestly. "Most days," I said. "The days I could see somebody getting it, clicking in, the moment something made sense to them, those were good days." She nodded like that was the right answer. "Get some sleep," she said. "We can talk more tomorrow." The next 3 days Detective Hargrove called with updates. Whitaker cooperated in exchange for a reduced charge and handed over every email. Bank records confirmed a $9,000 wire from my son-in-law's LLC to Dr. Foss labeled as a consultation fee. My daughter's financial records showed $195,000 in debt across 6 accounts, 2 of them carrying interest rates that indicated private lenders, not banks. She had been terminated from her position at the financial services firm 14 months prior for conduct violations. She had told me she'd left voluntarily for freelance work. On the second morning, I was at Darnell's kitchen table with a cup of coffee when Maya came in before school and asked me to explain how automatic transmission worked. I told her. She asked about brake fluid. I told her that too. She wrote everything down in a spiral notebook. "Why do you need to know this?" I asked. "I'm going to own a car someday," she said. "I don't want to not know things." I looked at her for a moment and thought of Dolores, who had said something remarkably similar to me the week after we got married, and I caught her reading the owner's manual for our first car. She said, "I don't like needing people to explain things to me. I'd rather just know." The trial happened 6 months later and lasted 8 days. The prosecution played all 4 recordings in open court. My son-in-law's voice carried through the room each time, level, untroubled, the voice of someone who had done the arithmetic and found it acceptable. My daughter testified that she hadn't known about the men. She said she'd believed the conservatorship was a protective measure, that her husband had convinced her it was necessary, that the debt, which was real and catastrophic, had made her desperate in ways she hadn't been able to think clearly through. She said she was sorry. She said it to the room, and then she turned and said it to me specifically, and I held her eyes and didn't look away. I said my piece at sentencing. I stood on legs that weren't entirely steady, and I talked about teaching her to ride her bike on the driveway, about driving 40 minutes on a school night to pick her up from a sleepover when she was 11 and too embarrassed to say she wanted to come home, about calling her first from the hospital parking lot the morning Dolores died because she was the person I needed to hear. I told her I didn't know when the person who needed money more than she needed. Her father had replaced the girl I raised. I told her I hoped she found out, in the years ahead, and I meant it without bitterness, which surprised me. My son-in-law received 18 years. My daughter received 9. Whitaker lost his law license and received 3 years probation. Dr. Foss was sentenced to 7 years, and his medical license was permanently revoked. The 2 men from my street each received 5 years. That was 2 years ago. I still live in the same ranch house in Tucson. The lemon tree Dolores planted in the backyard is producing well again this year. The house is louder than it used to be, which I did not expect to be grateful for, and I am. About 4 months after the trial, Darnell's landlord raised his rent past what made sense for a part-time Lyft driver with a daughter heading to college. I had a converted garage apartment that Dolores and I had always meant to properly finish. I told him to come look at it. He looked at it, asked if I was serious, and on a long weekend in April he and Maya moved in. Maya is 18 now. She starts at the University of Arizona in the fall, enrolled in the pre-PA Health Sciences track. I cover her tuition. She has dinner at the main house 3 times a week and argues with me about the designated hitter rule with the same focused intensity she brings to studying drug interactions. She calls me Vernon, which Darnell says is because she ran out of adults in her life to call by their first name and has decided I'm honorary peer-aged. Every morning, one of us starts the coffee. Some days it's me, some days Darnell, and some days we come downstairs to a full pot and a note from Maya saying she had an early study group and the coffee's from yesterday's grounds because she couldn't find the new bag. The 3 of us have breakfast together more mornings than not. It doesn't feel like an arrangement. It feels like what the house needed. I still volunteer at the resource center Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. I go with Darnell now. He drives me on his way back from dropping Maya at campus. He says it's on the route. It isn't. That's just the kind of man he is. I get a letter from my daughter every month, postmarked from the Perryville facility west of Phoenix. She writes about the program she's enrolled in, a financial literacy course, a book group, counseling twice a week. In the most recent letter, she wrote that she'd been thinking about the road trip we took when she was 9, driving up to the Grand Canyon, and how she'd gotten carsick on the switchbacks, coming back down, and I'd pulled over and sat on the hood of the car with her until the nausea passed. And she'd felt better, and we'd sat there another 20 minutes anyway, just because the view was something, and neither of us wanted to move. She said she hadn't thought about that afternoon in years. I've read every letter. I haven't written back yet. Maybe I will. The distance still needs a little more time to become something I can see through clearly. This is what I want to leave you with, because it's the thing I didn't know until I almost paid the price for not knowing it. The people who will save your life are not usually the ones you expect. They are the ones who show up on time, who remember how you take your coffee, who sit in the dark in your driveway until the porch light comes on, who spend money they don't have on a dash cam because you handed them something warm through a window on a cold night, and they couldn't make themselves forget it. Pay attention to who shows up. Pay attention to who stays. And if something feels wrong, if a question is asked one too many times, if the concern feels like it has a shape that doesn't quite match love, trust that feeling. Tell someone. Call your local adult protective services if you think someone you know is being exploited. Call the police. Don't wait until it's a Wednesday night and there's a car with the lights off parked on your street. I'm 66 years old and I'm here because one person refused to look the other way. Dolores always said, the people worth keeping in your life are the ones who notice the small things. She meant it as a lesson about friendship. I didn't know she was also telling me how to survive. She was right about most things. Thank you for being here today. If this story moved you, please subscribe for more true life stories. Share your thoughts below. I read every comment. And tell me where you're watching from. It matters more than you might think, knowing you're not out there alone.